So today's paper is titled Building Physical Health. What is the role of mental health? And this paper is joint work between myself, Duzani, who is at Kasasat University, and Prom Hong, who is a PhD student who just graduated and was supervised by me and Duzani. So let me say that this paper started initially as part of our curiosity, and along the way, we become excited on this topic. And in fact, this paper now is a part of a broader research agenda that we have developed. So in this research agenda, we are looking at subjective well-being, or happiness, if you like to call it, as an independent variable. So typically, economists are interested to see what makes us happy. In other words, they look at happiness as an outcome variable. Now, in our research, we want to go a little bit further than that and ask the question, after we know what makes people happy, what can we do with these higher happiness levels? So in this paper, we ask the question, can happier people actually be healthier as well? So along the way, we figured out some tools to study this paper, and we also benefited from some excellent referee reports. So let me start off by giving you an overview of the paper's main findings. In this paper, we find that good mental health predicts good physical health. We also find that those who were in good physical health in the past are more likely to be currently in good physical health as well. Now, to show these results, we derived 8 waves of panel data from the household, income, and labor dynamics of Australia. So these are panel data, and they are nationally representative for Australia. To identify the model, we used a dynamic panel estimator with instrumental variables. So this is just an overview of the paper.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
How do you define mental health?
That's a very good question. In the data section, I'm going to define specifically how we measure mental health. Okay? So I'm going to come back to that.
No specific definition yet, right?
No, I haven't given the definition yet. There will be quite a few questions there. There are different dimensions of mental health. I will come back to that. But that's very, very important. So thank you for mentioning it. So living standards continue to rise around the world. And at the same time, health behaviors such as tobacco use, physical inactivity, unhealthy diet are responsible for more than 36 million deaths annually. Although significant advancements in our knowledge have been made on how certain health behaviors impact physical health, the role of mental health seems to be largely ignored in the policy's agenda. However, mental health problems existed in the past as well and are now becoming increasingly common. Let's take Australia, for example, which is the source of our data. In Australia, about 20% of the people aged between 16 and 85 experience a mental illness. 3 types of mental illness are most common. These are depression, anxiety, and substance use. Now, interestingly, about half of the Australians with mental illness do not access any treatment. But about 75% of those who access treatment improved considerably. A large body of literature examines the dynamics of physical health. However, this literature typically ignores the role of mental health. At the same time, more and more empirical evidence is highlighting that mental health plays an important role in determining physical health. Now, also this literature typically abstains from modeling the dynamics of physical health. Let's take Rowan et al., for example, in 2005. In this paper, they studied the link between depression and coronary heart disease. They show that depressive symptoms at baseline are associated with a higher risk of developing coronary heart disease in the 4 following years. Now, closest in spirit to our approach is a paper by Onberger et al. This paper studies the relationship between physical and mental health, and unlike most of the previous studies, they account for health dynamics explicitly. They use 6 waves of the English longitudinal study of aging. So these data are nationally representative for the UK, and they focus on individuals aged 50 plus. And what they find is that past mental health is positively related to present physical health. Now, our contribution is twofold. First, our contribution is methodological. Well-known econometric problems make it challenging to study a dynamic health model. More specifically...
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
In the previous slide, when you are talking about dynamics, what do you, when you define dynamics, health dynamics, what do you have in mind?
So in this framework, when we normally talk about dynamics, we mean that the dependent variable, the lagged value of the dependent variable is included as an independent variable. So the current value...
Economically speaking.
I'm going to show the equation. So what I mean is that the current level of physical health is related to past levels of physical health.
Okay, so you have an investment story behind.
Yes, there is some state dependence.
Okay.
And yes, as you say, there can be some investments there in health. We can think of health actually as a stock variable that can be accumulated by making certain investments, typically in lifestyle choices and maybe social capital. Okay? So as I was saying, our contribution is twofold. First is methodological. In particular, well-known econometric problems make it challenging to study a dynamic health model. More specifically, the presence of the lag-dependent variable as a predictor means that OLS, or fixed effects estimators, are biased. For this reason, Arellano and Bond and Landell and Bond have proposed dynamic panel estimators. These estimators rely on internal instruments, and these internal instruments are appropriate lag values of the endogenous variables whose validity can be tested. Now, this approach can overcome the problem of dynamic panel bias, and this makes it ideal for our purpose. The second aspect of our contribution concerns investigating different sources of individual heterogeneity. For instance, Courtney reviewed the literature and concluded that, on average, women have a health advantage over men. And this is simply because women tend to have healthier lifestyle choices. In this paper, we ask if the effect of past mental health on present physical health differs across gender. And we also complement our analysis by exploring additional sources of individual heterogeneity. In particular, we look at people's age groups. And by doing that, we provide finer distinctions. And these finer distinctions can be valuable sources of information for health professionals and policymakers. Now, what we expect to find here, and let's talk a little bit about our hypothesis, what we expect to find is that good mental health predicts good physical health. Why is that? Dinner et al. And Ong offer extensive reviews. They suggest that subjective well-being, which includes mental health, may influence physical health via 3 different pathways: physiological systems, stress, and health behaviors. The main idea here is that people high in well-being tend to have better physiological systems and lower stress levels, as well as better health behaviors. Now, to understand this finding, one has to look at the broaden and build theory. Now, this is a very, very interesting theory that was introduced by Fredrickson. Barbara Fredrickson is a professor of psychology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So what Fredrickson proposes is that positive emotions broaden a person's awareness and thereby provide a wider set of thoughts and actions to draw upon. One probably needs to read this statement. It's very, very interesting. Now, what happens here is that broadened thought action repertoires help to build resources over time. Okay, this is what Jan Frederick was talking before about building human capital. So another way of saying this is that positive emotions help us to build human capital. Okay, and this helps explain the fact that people higher in well-being tend to have more resources than those with lower well-being. So it is reasonable to expect that mental health, which is a key component of well-being, will influence physical health. More specifically, we believe that people who have higher levels of mental health would also be in better physical health, simply because they are more likely to have better health behaviors and physiological functions. So these variables, better health behaviors and physiological functions, if you like, in a mediation framework, you can think of these as mediating variables. These are the investments that people with better mental health would make in order to get the outcome of better physical health. Okay? Now, of course, in this paper, we don't do mediation analysis. We do that in another paper. In this paper, we simply look at the link between mental and physical health. But this is a way to understand why we expect that good mental health will lead to good physical health. Right, so let's look at our data. Our data come from HILDA. As I said before, these are national representative panel data for Australia. We analyze waves 11 to 18, covering the period 2011 to 2018. And our analytical sample consists of respondents aged 15 and above. Our final sample corresponds to an unbalanced panel of 10,400 individuals and about 51,400 observations. Now, the assumption of an unbalanced panel can be relaxed here, and I'm going to talk about that later. Now, let's look at our measures of physical and mental health. So it's very important here to see precisely how we define these variables. Now, both of these variables come from the 36-item short-form health survey. So there are 36 questions that help us to define physical and mental health. This is a measure that has been used repeatedly by economists and health professionals. And out of the 36 questions, 21 questions concern physical health and 14 questions concern mental health. Physical health is measured along 4 dimensions, and there are also 4 dimensions to mental health. Now, the HILDA survey provides for users the scores for each of these 8 scales. Okay, and these scores are provided on a range from 0 to 100, where higher values represent better health. Now, before constructing our physical and mental health indexes, we need to look at the Cronbach's-Alpha reliability statistic. Here we find that Cronbach's-Alpha for physical health is slightly above 0.83. What this means is that the different dimensions of physical health display internal consistency that is highly reliable. And this allows us to construct an index for physical health. We do that by averaging the scores across the 4 dimensions of physical health for each observation. And we follow a similar procedure to construct a summary measure for mental health. Now, this approach is similar to that used in previous studies, but we also relax the assumption of using average scores across the different dimensions of physical and mental health, and instead, we construct our physical and mental health measures using factor analysis. The results are qualitatively similar in that case. Now, regarding control variables, these are standard in the literature, and they are derived from the literature about the determinants of physical health. Now, let's talk about our model. So this is our baseline specification. The dependent variable is physical health of individual I at time t. The key independent variable is mental health, and we use the lag value of mental health. Now here, the reason why we like mental health is because we believe, and that's a common approach in the literature, that investments need time to materialize. Okay, so when we invest in our physical health, investments will not materialize, they will not come into fruition immediately. Here we assume that they will manifest themselves in the next period. Of course, here you could include further lags if you like. You could include mental health at t-2. That actually strengthens the estimated coefficients. Now, apart from mental health, which is the key independent variable, we control for the lag value of physical health. Again, here you could include deeper lags if you like, but again, this is a standard approach in the literature. And basically, the inclusion of the lag value of physical health as a regressor captures dynamic behavior. And here it is assumed that physical health follows a first-order Markov process, a common assumption in the literature. Now there's a problem here that as soon as we include the lag value of physical health as a regressor, OLS and fixed effects estimators are going to yield biased estimates of the coefficients. Okay? So OLS and fixed effects can only be used as a benchmark in this setting. Now, for this reason, we utilize a well-established identification strategy. And this strategy is based on the dynamic parallel estimators of Arellano bond and Blandel bond. Arellano bond's estimator is known as difference GMM, and Blandel's and bond's estimator is known as system GMM. Both these estimators rely on internal instruments. And these internal instruments are nothing else but earlier lags of variables already included in the model. And we can test their validity. Now, this approach has been successfully implemented by other scholars in a variety of settings, ranging from health economics to labor economics and even finance. So let's look at these two estimation methods. Arellano and bond. Arellano and bond first takes first differences in order to eliminate the individual fixed effects. And then it uses lag values of the endogenous variables as instruments. On the other hand, Blandel and bond estimation builds a system of two equations. These two equations are the original equation in levels, and the second equation is the first difference version of the original equation. Then Blandel and bond modify the estimator to include lag levels and lag differences as instruments. And in the level equation, the endogenous variables are then instrumented with their own first differences. Now, in this context, we have to see which method to use, or we can perhaps use both if diagnostic tests allow us to do so. However, what we find here is that Arellano and bond estimation, as opposed to Blandel and bond, is permissible. Now, you might be wondering, what are these diagnostic tests? There are two diagnostic tests here that tell us about the method to use. The first test concerns examining serial correlation in the residuals. And second, we have to test the validity of the instruments. Okay? So Arellano and Bond have developed a test for serial correlation in the residuals. Here, we find no evidence of AR2 behavior in the different residuals, which means that there is no AR1 in the levels of the residuals. So this is desirable in using lag values as instruments for our endogenous variables. The second diagnostic test is the Hansen J Test, and we use this test to assess the joint validity of the instrument. So whenever you see Hansen J Test, it means that the model is over-identified. It means that the number of instruments exceeds the number of endogenous variables. So here we can test for over-identifying restrictions, and more specifically, we treat past mental health and past physical health, these two key variables, as endogenous. Now here, the Hansen J test does not reject the null hypothesis that all IVs are valid. How do we implement all this procedure? Well, there is a data command. This data command is xdiabond2, and it has been developed by Rudman. So this is a paper in the Data Journal in 2009. And the xdiabond2 command allows us to estimate our model, and it also allows us to carry out the two diagnostic tests. Now, before moving to the econometric results, let's see some preliminary findings based on the raw data. Okay, so this is an exploratory part. I'm saying this mainly for our PhD students, that before we jump to run our model, it's good to look at patterns or trends in the raw data. So in in figure 1, we display the relationship between past mental health and present physical health. Past mental health is on the horizontal axis, and current physical health is on the vertical axis. We see here that the relationship is positive overall. This means that individuals who had good mental health in the previous wave are more likely to be currently in good physical health. In figure 2, we can also see that the relationship between past and present physical health is also positive overall. Now, these two findings are consistent with our initial expectations. Okay, so they go back to our initial hypothesis, where we expected that good mental health will lead to good physical health. But this is only tentative evidence. It is tentative evidence because it is simply based on raw data. And without controlling for a variety of personal, social, and economic factors, we cannot draw any firm conclusions. We try to do that next by looking at some econometric estimates. Now, these estimates are based on the OLS and fixed effects estimators. And for this reason, we know that these estimators are biased, so they only serve as a benchmark. So let's see what the estimates say here. Let's look at column 1, where we present estimates based on OLS. We see here that the estimated coefficient on past mental health is positive and significant. This estimate over here. Now, this implies that those who had good mental health in the past are more likely to be in good present physical health. We also find that past physical health is positively correlated with present physical health, the coefficient at the top here. Now, in column 2, we are using the fixed effects estimator, and by doing that, we can correct potential bias emanating from unobserved heterogeneity at the individual level. Okay? Now, when we use fixed effects, we see that the magnitudes of the estimated coefficients become smaller, and in fact, the estimated coefficient on past physical health turns from positive in the OLS model to negative in the fixed effects model. What this implies is that the estimated coefficients on past physical and past mental health picked up individual fixed effects, and this caused an upward bias to the OLS estimates in column 1. Okay? So these were benchmark estimates. Now, in table 2, we present our preferred estimates, which are based on the difference GMM estimator of Arellano and Bond. Here, we show results for the full sample, as well as separately by gender. Here we see that past mental health continues to be positively related to present physical health. And more specifically, a 1 standard deviation increase in past mental health increases present physical health by about 0.037 standard deviations. The number over here. Likewise, a 1 standard deviation increase in past physical health increases present physical health by 0.037 standard deviations. Now, looking at the statistics at the bottom of the table, we can see that there's no evidence of AR2 behavior in the difference residual, and also the Hansen J test does not reject the null hypothesis that all IVs are valid. Now the question is, are the estimates economically meaningful? Now to answer this, let's take, for example, the average person in past mental health and the person who is 1 standard deviation above the average. The estimates in column 1 show that the difference between these two groups of individuals is about 0.037 standard deviations. Now, all things being equal, we can show that such difference is approximately 43% of the effect of being out of the labor force versus being employed. So we may conclude here that the estimates are not only statistically significant, but they're also economically meaningful. Then in columns 2 and 3, we separate the data by gender of the respondent. We can see here that past physical health is significant only among females, whereas past mental health is significant among both genders. Do these effects represent actual differences across gender? Now, to test that, we need to use a 2-sample Z test, and we find here that males and females did not differ systematically. Next, we continue looking for alternative sources of individual heterogeneity. And here we ask if those aged 50 plus differ from their younger counterparts in how either past physical or past mental health relate to present physical health. Again here, we found qualitatively similar results across age groups using a 2-sample Z test. Now, of course, we need to confirm the validity of these results, and we do that by carrying out a number of robustness checks. Now, the first check that we do concerns attrition or dropout and wave non-response. So this is a pretty standard check. The idea here is that we use a pretty long panel of 8 waves. And this means that people with mental health problems might drop out, or we might lose participants due to death or other reasons. What this means is that we may retain a sample of healthier respondents than intended. Now, to examine this, we estimated our model on a balanced panel, and we also use longitudinal weights provided by Hilda. The use of weights here allows us to adjust for differential unit non-response in the balanced panel. The results comparing the unbalanced and the balanced panel were qualitatively similar. So attrition and wave non-response, or more broadly, missingness of data, does not appear to be an issue here. We also estimated the reverse relationship, modeling present mental health as a function of past mental health. Sorry, I should say here, past physical health and other control variables. So this is the reverse relationship. And here we found that past mental health predicts present mental health. However, there is no relationship between past physical health and present mental health. Now, in our main analysis, we treated past physical and past mental health as endogenous variables. As a robustness check, we consider physical activity and social interaction as additional endogenous variables, and we use the difference CMM estimator to identify the model. Again, the results were qualitatively similar. In our main analysis, also we used physical and mental health index based on average scores. As a robustness check, we relaxed this assumption and we constructed alternative physical and mental health indexes based on factor analysis. And finally, we examined the role of other health behaviors, including smoking and drinking. So here you can think of smoking and drinking as omitted variables that may be driving the relationship between physical and mental health. When these variables are also included and controlled for in our regression model, the results remain unchanged. So the main findings of the paper are pretty robust, at least regarding the checks that we did here. So to summarize, in this paper, we set out to examine the dynamic relationship between physical and mental health. So again, what makes the model dynamic in an econometric point of view is the inclusion of the lag-dependent variable as a predictor. And here we ask whether and to what extent mental health affects subsequent physical health. We utilized 8 waves of panel data from Hilde, and we recognize the fact that the inclusion of the lag-dependent variable as a predictor means that or less of fixed effects estimators are biased. That's why we utilize the dynamic panel estimator with instrumental variables for identification. And what we found was that good mental health predicts good physical health. We also showed that individuals who were in good physical health in the past are more likely to be currently in good physical health as well. Estimation by subgroups showed results that were qualitatively similar across gender and age group. Overall, these findings provide some of the first empirical evidence about the importance of mental health for physical health maintenance in Australia. So if past mental health plays an important role for present physical health, can we suggest something about public policy? Well, if that's the case, one policy recommendation might be to provide support to people with mental health problems, including depression and anxiety. Such initiatives are very important, simply because mental health disorders are becoming increasingly common around the world, and knowing which individuals might be particularly at risk is a key element of optimal policy design. Right, I think I should put a full stop here.
Okay, so thank you everybody for participating. I think Ajahn Vasileios has a meeting waiting for him.
Yeah, meeting.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you very, very much.
Good luck.
Thank you.